Is my voice working?
Yep,
Okay. Video's fine?
everything looks good.
Okay.
And we are now live on YouTube. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello to both of you. Let's go through some housekeeping first, and then we'll do some introductions. So welcome to the Banned Books Week campaign. This is our fourth webinar in the series, which ends tomorrow. And you can find out more about it at ala.org/bbooks. This is brought to you by the two roundtables, the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable and the Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable, both of the American Library Association. And this year's theme for Banned Books Week is Censorship Leaves Us in the Dark, Keep the Light On. Our subject today is LGBT challenges in literature and comic books. And I would like to introduce Michelle Perez, who is the author and artist for The Pervert. And you can
No. One correction. I am I'm the writer of The Pervert. The artist is Remy Boydell.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for putting that in there. And we
No worries.
also have Grace Ellis, who is the author of
Yes.
Moonstruck. And myself, I am Moni Barrette. I am a board member for the Comics Roundtable and also a principal librarian for the Chula Vista Public Library. So a little bit of history of Banned Books Week. It is a celebration of the freedom to read and express ideas. It was first launched in 1982 by three organizations: the American Library Association, the American Booksellers Association, and the National Association of College Stores. Banned Books today is ALA and 13 other contributors and sponsors, and it reaches 2.8 billion people through mainstream media. The Keep the Lights On campaign, as I mentioned, is this year's theme, and some of the things that they're doing is a Dear Banned Author letter writing campaign. We've had webinars all week, and actually the last one was yesterday, but I'm sure that you can still find them available to watch. You can also pick up promotional materials for Banned Books Week in the ALA store. There are some free Banned Books Week downloads, and there's also a Celebrating Banned Books Week Facebook group. And further resources for reporting censorship, which it's amazing how much censorship goes unreported. The Banned Books Week website, which I mentioned, the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable, and of course, the Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable. And here's where you can join us. So a little bit about the Comics Roundtable. The Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable of the American Library Association is dedicated to supporting library staff in all aspects of engaging with graphic novels and comics, including collection development, programming, and advocacy. And for more information, connect with GNCRT on Facebook. And you can see the links. We are very active on Twitter at LibComics, Instagram also at LibComics, and we have a Facebook page. The Intellectual Freedom Roundtable, also the American Library Association, provides a forum for the discussion of activities, programs, and problems in intellectual freedom of libraries and librarians, serves as a channel of communications on intellectual freedom matters, promotes a greater opportunity for involvement among the members of the ALA in defense of intellectual freedom, and promotes a greater feeling of responsibility in the implementation of ALA policies on intellectual freedom. Super important things. So connect with them at IFRT_ALA on Twitter. A little bit about Image Comics is one of our sponsors today. Image Comics is a comic book and graphic novel publisher founded in 1992 by a collective of best-selling artists. Image has since gone on to become one of the largest comics publishers in the United States. Image currently has 6 individuals on the board of directors: Robert Kirkman, Eric Larson, Todd McFarlane, Mark Silvestri, Jim Valentino, and Eric Stevenson. It consists of 5 major houses: Todd McFarlane Productions, Top Cow Productions, Shadowline Comics, Skybound Entertainment, and Image Central. Image publishes comics and graphic novels in nearly every genre, subgenre, and style imaginable. It offers science fiction, fantasy, romance, horror, crime fiction, historical fiction, humor, and more, some books which are a combination of many of those things, by the finest artists and writers working in the medium today. For more information, you can visit imagecomics.com. Today, we are discussing LGBTQ challenges, including the disproportionately high incidence of challenges to the LGBTQ plus books, particularly those for young readers, the increase in challenges and cancellations of drag queen storytime, which I have some firsthand experience with, and the importance of seeing oneself in literature. There we all are. Grace, Michelle, I think Grace, you're still on mute.
Oh,
there.
Sorry, I was trying to be polite.
Hey, you know what? That's our glitch. We got it out of the way. How are you both doing this morning?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah, great. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining me. This is super exciting.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah. So my first question is actually going to be so that we can tell the audience a little bit about your books. So your books present different stories and perspectives from the LGBTQ community. And I want to go ahead and start with Michelle, just so we're not trying to talk over each other. Can you tell the audience more about your book and why you chose to tell the story the way that you did?
The book is called The Pervert. It is basically a sort of fictionalization of my time in sex work and kind of doing it before I was out and then doing it after I was out. And it came about after me and the artist Remy Boydell had become friends. And basically it was originally going to be a pitch to Vice. That didn't turn out well, and we pitched it to Brandon Graham at Image, and then basically then it just went to Eric Stevenson, and all those people talked that all over, and it ran an island for a little while. They were basically 10 page stories that kind of ran in an anthology, but we wanted it to basically work like vignettes, so you could come into any of them and have an idea of what was going on. And it's kind of really melancholy, and it focuses on each of our strengths, and basically Remy's watercolors on it are amazing. I think that's a good takeaway, like no matter what people may think of the content, really, really pretty stuff.
Nice. Well, it is. The watercolor is amazing, and not everything has to have a happy ending. But do you want to talk about Moonstruck, Grace?
Sure. So Moonstruck is, I like to pitch it as a werewolf barista romance adventure. It's very different from The Pervert.
Yeah.
Maybe they're like good compliments though, because Moonstruck is like kind of always really happy.
Yeah.
So they fit together pretty well, ultimately, I think. But the history of Moonstruck is that it started as a 5-page anthology series, or anthology in like this anthology book that Columbus College of Art and Design puts out every year. The editor of that anthology, Lauren McCubbin, paired me with artist Shay Beagle, who is non-binary, they, them pronouns. And we just got along so well, and it just like made so much sense that we took it to Image, and here we are, having the time of our lives on this webinar.
And I do appreciate having read both of these during the week, that I did get, the more bleak picture and then the more happy, like had my upper, had my downer.
Yeah,
so
it's like a little chaser,
Those perspectives were great, yes. So both of you then were the writers on this, and that was kind of, my understanding is that was your first time being the writer on this. Is that correct for both of you?
I would say my first time as a writer for like published comics.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a writer on a lot of stuff, but this was my first time sort of making my own thing.
Okay. And how did that feel though, to have a book published by Image Comics with your name as the writer?
It felt pretty great. Most of what I had come up through was very, very small blogs like Medium Difficulty. I'd done some reviews at the Rainbow Hub. I think there was one called 5 out of 10. Basically, a problem nowadays with being in writing is like a lot of it can either be like one single millionaire funding it, or you're completely user funded or advertiser funded. So like a downside of cutting out your own path like that is your portfolio. Like, you better be on good terms with your editors and remember their emails, because it's really hard to build a library of your body of work. And so what was great about having a published thing is like, yes, this is me. I'm not making this.
For sure. I want to ask you both also, what is your experience with banned or challenged books before you were writers? Do you remember anything as kids, or does anything stick out in your mind?
Oh man, I wasn't allowed. I was literally just talking about this. I wasn't allowed to read Harry Potter, a classic banned book. Apparently still being banned, like actively being banned, which is really interesting. But yeah, I think honestly, here's something really interesting. So my other book is Lumberjanes. That was my first like foray into comics, Monster Fighting Girl Scouts. Every person on that team was not allowed to read Harry Potter as a child.
Oh wow.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
That influenced a lot of
I think that it must have. That was such a bizarre time when we discovered that about each other, and how this was just like a backlash to that, I guess, you know.
Wow. And Michelle, any previous experience with banned or challenged books?
Oh, actually, no. This is kind of in the complete opposite direction. I think the most overhead I had in terms of media consumption, where my parents took an active role, was like, oh, here's cable television, here's HBO. You should not watch HBO after 10 p.m. for reasons we're not going to explain. And of course, then that happened, and then my folks would like try to contextualize what I saw to me. Like, I think it's good to have like boundaries, but at the same time, you have to like put into context what is being seen, because if it's read exclusively in the abstract, then you're going to form weird associations. I mean, I'm not a doctor or anything, but it would stand to reason if no one explains like the everyone is in diapers episode of Real Sex to like an 8-year-old, then you're gonna be like, what? Why? They're not going to be able to like when you're a child, abstractions are the furthest thing from your mind. The moon is not like X amount of miles in that direction. It's like this far away. So yeah, my parents pretty much let me see everything. Oh no, they were backwards on it. If it was really violent, I could see it, but if exposed breasts were involved, it was a no-go. I could watch The Matrix when I was like 12, but if like a pair of breasts came out at any time in any other film with like egregious violence, that was a no-go. That's probably a Midwest thing.
I was gonna say that's a weird like Puritan. We can kill each other, but as long as we don't make love, it's fine.
Right. Classic American take.
Absolutely. So for both of you also, if your books have ever been challenged, or if they were to be challenged, how personally do you take that? Or do you take that as a win, or would you be upset? What would you say to someone if you were in the position to respond and they said, this book is it, you know, what would you have to say to them?
What about like banning a book of mine, or?
Yeah. How would you feel about it, and what would you say to the person?
Well, I kind of have a slight amount of experience with that, although I mean it was contextualized through the quote unquote culture wars, and and I think now I wouldn't really say anything because it basically feels like a social media engagement cycle.
Mhm.
That like a group of people tried to stop Image from printing my book, and that did not happen. And I mean, I've disagreed with a lot of people from that specific scene, but I've never said you can't, you know, print your garbage book about rehashing old 1980s jingoism tropes. If you want to, if you want to do that, more power to you. I don't think more or less garbage is an innately moral thing. I would, I don't know. I would say, I would examine your life and think why, the only thing you think you have control of in your life is like media and not any larger overarching problems. And what's the disconnect there?
Yeah, absolutely agree. And we'll touch on some of that too when we talk about Drag Queen Storytime. But what about you, Grace?
Well, to my knowledge, Moonstruck has never been challenged. I think it's because it like seems a little bit older, like the characters are a little older. But I do have a great example of Lumberjanes being challenged. So Lumberjanes, the age is like, I mean, it's all ages, but like 5 to like 12. So I was doing this school visit, and this kid had been like really pushing to get me there. And I get there, and they introduce me to the librarian, and they say, this librarian thinks that Lumberjanes is a teen book and goes in the teen section, and then walked away. So it was just me and this librarian who I was like very much about to argue with. It was an interesting visit, I'll say that. But I think mostly the problem that Lumberjanes has is that it does get like bumped up when it's not a teen book, really.
Yeah.
It's for kids, but the fact that it has any LGBTQ characters at all makes people feel like it's not like appropriate, which is like pretty ridiculous. Just like gay people existing, you have to like bump it up age-wise, but no, that's silly.
Well, and Michelle mentioned before we started recording that people have actually brought the pervert and been like, this is children's material. Why is it
Oh, God.
Like, no,
No.
it goes back to contextualizing, and also contextualizing and who's doing it. I won't litigate why certain people feel the way they do, because that's kind of a fool's errand. I don't think you're going to be able to dismantle the inherent logic to like Abrahamic faiths that have existed for hundreds or thousands of years or whatever. But what I would say is that a big problem is also, and it's been getting better, but like sometimes it has been at the publisher side and it's been on the media side where LGBTQ like is immediately associated with adult themes somehow, because a lot of people do not know how to see the other, and something that they consciously acknowledge as the other as anything less than transgressive, and therefore like this has to be bumped up in age somehow. But like, yeah, there are gay kids all over the place. There's so many gay kids. Like, and no one wants to say the absolutely insane thing, which is that like a great uniting thing behind most, if not all, groups is that everyone that comprises them is incredibly boring. Like those gay kids, boring as hell, probably. They're not like trying to start some apocalyptic dismantling of your culture. They're just gay, and I don't know, they like juice boxes and whatever kids do, go Gertz. I don't know. And people want to use that as some sort of fulcrum to a greater discussion, and That's why they never talk about all of the boring people. It's that there are exceptions to the rule, and the only thing we can cite as exceptions to the rule. And so you will always have the most egregious examples touted. And you'll always have people, demonized as a result. It's probably the worst part of the media conversation, without question.
Just being in a position to have hosted again the Drag Queen Storytime, I can absolutely agree with you on that. I think that people have this perception that someone is so other because of what they identify, and it's like we're all just people at the end of the day. I don't know. So on that note, more than half of the top 11 most frequently challenged and banned books of 2018 include LGBTQ content, and this is according to an ALA report. And they also stated that these challenges are increasing, especially those that have transgender characters or themes. So in your perception as creators, have you felt that challenges have increased, or is that not part of your everyday realm? And if you think they've increased, why do you think that might be the case?
Without question. There was a report I was reading recently. I'm not sure if it was GLAAD or whatever, but basically 2016 onward, for whatever reason, public support for LGBTQ persons among 18 to 25-year-olds has been steadily going down. It's basically one of those culture shifts that in American culture oftentimes is because of whoever may be in charge of a given government at a certain time.
Whatever that might be.
But yeah, basically it's also just media messaging and the greater body of online discourse and demonization via places like YouTube, Facebook, and etc. Just recently, over the last few days, Facebook fell in step with a Twitter policy that now YouTube is adopting, where hate speech basically no longer applies to elected officials, which is great. And so, however people may feel about censorship and hate speech and rules and moderation policies relative to hate speech, we have a problem addressing that, like what norms get engendered by media messaging affects people that have nothing to do with it, and are, again, those same boring people I was talking about that don't really engage with this and aren't like a public Twitter personality or whatever. And that's the thing. It's cynical, it's crass, it's garbage, and I've felt some pushback, and at the end of the day, it's no one wants to hear it's going to get worse before it gets better, and I think it will require more than, I think, fighting the media half of it. It's going to be talking to people and saying, like, can we at least agree on a base amount of humanity? I don't want to get my head smashed in with a rock because you watched like a bunch of YouTube videos nonstop.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Grace, do you have a take on that?
God, that's hard to follow. So I think that when it comes to just everyday writing, like actually sitting down to do the thing, I don't really think about things getting banned or challenged. I just think about, how can I make this the best story that I can? How can I reflect like the world around me in this book? My philosophy is kind of like, if people have a problem with it, I'm I don't really care. You know, my job as a writer is to tell the story that I want to tell in the way that I want to tell it, and like hopefully get it seen by as many people as possible, or at least have the audience that I'm looking for find it, because not everything's for everyone. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe people can grow up and realize that. I like that. Not everything is for everyone, y'all, and that's okay. So the importance of seeing oneself in literature, it's so loftily written. In your guys' own words, can you tell me what is the importance of seeing yourself in literature? Have you felt that there's been a need for representation in the past? I know that Michelle has had mixed feelings about the concept of representation.
Oh, I think that there's something to be said for seeing yourself out in the world. But I think, like everything, I'm not into anything unconditionally.
Mhm.
I think there's something to be said that every time recently that there has been pride announcements and then corporate pride stuff saying we support you, we love you, etc. People can tie consumption of a product to how real they are and are not. And I think that is incredibly dangerous and a backward way of thinking. And that while, yes, there is such a thing as a net good, I'm always going to be in favor of people from that experience doing that work, getting the money, as opposed to people that basically try to define your narrative for you and on occasion throw you a bone just to say that they did. It's very cynical, it's very ugly, and we see a lot of things in our monoculture take this approach, and to me, I can't stand it. Show me a trans author making something representative of their experience as opposed to like a show with 6 non-trans people as showrunners defining their narrative for them. That's how I'll always feel though.
Yeah, that feels especially relevant to the pervert because it's such a specific experience, and it's one that you're working off of what you know. I'm curious. I'm sorry. Is this okay if I ask you a question?
No, go for it.
I'm curious how much you were thinking about representation when you were telling your story. Like, were you thinking about, obviously this is not a universal experience, but were you thinking about reaching out to other, like having the story reach other trans sex workers?
Oh, my whole thought process was, first, the story itself has to be the main thing. And some of it was also taking myself out of it. And it's not because I think broad consensus is the only way to tell a story, but it was also like, this is such a specific experience that the theme I wanted to go for most wasn't just sex work, but just work as an idea. And that while not everyone can identify with an experience of being trans and doing sex work, but like everyone can on some level say, here is work I've done. I've put a lot of it into me, or I put a lot of me into it, and like there's some of me I'm never getting back from it. And so you don't have to have experienced what I've experienced to get that very specific feeling. That's why the things that also were shown in that book were also jobs I had had before that and jobs I had lost. And I think at the end of the day, I would like it to not just be part of like the sex worker equation, but just how people feel about their work in general, and the way that's constructed, and you know how it can kind of lead to a lot of feelings of almost alienation. And I don't think that's a feeling unique to me. And so I think it's why I've gotten a lot of the positive responses I've had from people that are nowhere near it. And don't get me wrong, trans sex workers that I know across the board have loved it and have sent me a lot of messages. It's one of the weirdest experiences one can have in their life when I've had like 3 people say they've incorporated the physical book itself into like porn clips they've made. Like, that's a feather in the hat.
I have to say, if I'm allowed to have my opinion as, straight female sitting here, but I really appreciated the pervert because that was a perspective that I had not experienced and had not been exposed to. So I actually really appreciate that book. And then I feel like Moonstruck is for me, because that's like, and then Lumberjanes I'm going to share with my 7-year-old, and because it's delightful and she's going to adore it. But the pervert is something that I made a couple of straight male friends read, because I was like, here's a perspective that you need to be aware of out there. And they're like, this makes me so uncomfortable. I'm like, exactly why you should read it. So
that was like one of our mission statements. And what was weird was learning everyone who had like talked about maybe the gay experience and like air quotes.
Yeah.
But then I realized, one, how many people had never seen gay sex, period, depicted in something, like, let alone in static images of media. It was eye-opening and deeply weird. Like, it's weird to see how many opinions get formed around general gay experience, around people that have not exposed themselves to, like, apparently anything.
Yeah, no, for sure. So did you guys have any titles that you feel like paved the way for you to get here, or did you kind of blaze your own trail?
Oh man, God, that's a great question. Michelle, do you have any ideas? I want to think about it for a second.
Down to me.
Yeah, I am. I'm sorry.
Double down and be like, no, my book was the first.
I
know.
Stuff that influenced me, stuff that, well, I would say for me, I've read a lot of Vonnegut. I'm a big fan of someone who couldn't be any more different than me, Cormac McCarthy. Just the bleakness in tone, and like it's someone that couldn't be further apart from me. A very, very nihilistic conservative guy, but what is great about that perspective to me is just like a guy who clearly believes in God and moralism, but like God has abandoned us or something. And like you're looking at moralism after the fact. Other stuff on the comics end, I would say stuff like Kate Wirt's body of work, and that weird detached tone a lot of her stuff has had. It's like a weird comic called Ass Castle. I'm not making that up, where it was just very deeply stupid, but like intellectually rich thoughts on gay stuff, and then also just goofy, nonsensical stuff like Omaha the Cat Dancer, where it was just like, I guess that's someone who blazed the trail for gay furry comics, I guess.
Well,
again, a hard act to follow.
Tough. Okay, so first I wanna shout out like Sunday comics, just like strip comics in the Sunday paper. That was like all I read growing up in terms of comics. I didn't read floppies. It was the 90s. They were like it was a different scene at the time. So like comic strips, Peanuts, I wouldn't be here without all of that. But then also like Raina Telgemeier, which seems like such a basic, like that's a very basic bitch shout out. But like, listen, I mean, when we started working on Lumberjanes, one of the first things that Shannon Waters put in my hands was drama, which is always on the most challenged list. And I think that, I mean, anyone who's working in kids comics right now owes a great deal to Raina and the work that she's done. I mean, it's hard to even conceptualize how huge those books are and how, like, I mean, they've established a whole language of kid, like that in Moonstruck, actually. We have these pages of another comic. So there's like an in-universe comic in Moonstruck called Pleasant Mountain Sisters. And it's drawn in the style of those Raina books, because when you see them, you like, the people who are reading them will understand that this is the kind of story it is, because this is what Raina's work looks like, and these are the kinds of stories Raina tells in like Babysitter's Club, at least. Which is, I mean, the Pleasant Mountain Sisters are like intentionally very hokey, and I don't want to say that her books are hokey in that same way, but you understand, like it's like a real sweet kids book, you know, when you see it's using the language of comics to like illustrate that. It's a very sweet kids book. So I definitely have to say Raina as well. I would also say I read a lot of plays, and I always like to point that out, because I think that it's really important to read other kinds of media. And if you're writing scripts anyway, then you should be reading like the best scripts you can find, and a lot of those are plays. So if you're looking for some interesting scripts, just pick up any play, especially like Pulitzer-winning plays. Oh my God, I'm on a real big kick right now. They're fascinating. What people think the American experience is, it's crazy. It's great. 10 out of 10 recommended.
Nice. I have not heard that one before. We're going to roll forward, unless you guys have any other thoughts about what we've talked about so far, to talk about challenges and cancellations to drag queen story times. So think about if you've had any experience with that, or if you have any questions about that. But I want to invite our audience to make sure that they're putting their questions in chat, because we will get to that in just a few minutes. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable, because it's like, this is the first of our series that has had the moderator talk about their own experience. So I apologize, but this is what I was asked to do. We only do what they tell us to do, okay?
No, we're here for you. You're doing great.
So have either one of you heard of the drag queen? There's actually a national group trademarked Drag Queen Story Hour or Drag Queen Story Time. But either way, have you heard of the phenomenon, not just in libraries, of drag queens reading to people across the nation?
Yes. And when you're done with your story, I'm positive that I have a thing to tack on.
I hear like 2 news stories. 1, it's happening, or like 2, it's happening, and people are mad about it.
People are mad about it, because there are no other problems in the world than to worry about people opting in to come to have a beautiful human being read you uplifting stories and sing songs, you know? So I work, as I mentioned, for the Chula Vista Public Library. I'm relatively new here. And the first thing I did was bring issues, because I was like, I actually have a couple of staff members that are in the LGBTQ community. And I was talking to them, I said, and I just meant in general, though, like, what programming have you not gotten to do for the library that you would love to do? And they're like, we want to do one of those drag queen story times. And this is literally, this branch is tiny. We're thinking we're going to have 20 people, just a little basic normal story time, the way we've had fireman story time and read to a dog and everyone else that we do. But we just quietly dropped it on the calendar. We didn't make a big deal. A national hate group found out about it and started, they're not even from here, they don't vote here, started just bombarding us, bombarding our city leaders.
What group was it?
This was Mass Resistance.
Okay.
So they sent us a direct email, and they've been listed as a hate group. It's debatable. So just so that we don't get sued, I will say it is debatable, but they have been listed as terrorists by some. But anyway, there are different chapters. Some say white supremacists, some say they're not. So I'm just gonna let you form your own opinion. But it was Mass Resistance, and they contacted us. But from there, local church groups, local families. I would like to say, before we get too into the weeds of the negative, that we had a whole lot more support. I just think that the supporters didn't realize this was going to be a thing at first. So I just wanted to talk about Drag Queen Storytime. What you said you had something to tack on? What was?
Yeah. Okay. So in July, this woman who writes, she wrote a Lumberjanes graphic novel. Her name is Lila Sturgis. She is a trans woman, which is very relevant to this story. Yes. She was going to do just like a library event in Texas. And of course, all this is all like foaming at the time. And 2 hours before the event was supposed to start, they canceled it very abruptly. Because Drag Queen Story Hour controversies were starting to bubble up. And this woman is not a drag queen. She's just like a trans woman. I don't know. But they said that, they said that the reason was because she didn't do a background check, but they didn't ask her to do a background check beforehand. And like, I did a library event like days before this happened, and I wasn't asked to do a background check. And no one ever has a problem with me doing anything, but because she's a trans woman, they had a huge problem with it. So it's really, I mean, it's affecting the community in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, and we were aware of that, and I was afraid for the city leaders, because that's really where it comes down to, is like the library may want to do something, the community may want to do something, but at the end of the day, it's whomever governs. And so if your mayor and or city council doesn't stand up to, you know, all the groups that are bombarding, if they cave to that pressure. And so that's based on Lila Sturgis and a few others that had been canceled last minute. I was really concerned that that was going to happen here. And I really appreciate how our city stood up. And it was a really great thing as a new person to this job to be like, our city is badass and we fight for what's right. We are a pride city. We put the flag up the day of, right where the protesters were standing. So it's like behind all of the shots, they bring their media and it's this beautiful pride flag just flowing in the wind. But we ended up having 300 attendees for the story time itself. And it's funny that you mentioned the background check, because that is something, and every library, every municipality has a different take on that. But for us, if you come in as a one-time presenter or performer, as you've mentioned that you've done before, we don't require it because staff is present. You're not actually physically interacting with anyone. And so it was the same thing, was these groups started trying to get us to give up the names of the performers. And there was no valid reason in the world. I actually asked someone who called me, I was like, oh, are you trying to book them? And she was like, reach out to them through social media. You know, here are their handles. That's all we're going to give you. We're under no obligation. So we were subjected to public records requests where they were digging through our emails, trying to find the names. And we managed to keep their animosity up until afterward, when the San Diego Reader, shout out y'all, wanted to do a non-biased piece on it, and the first line put the names of the performers for everyone to see. So you know what, nothing to hide. They're educators, they're amazing human beings. We had a couple hate groups show up, and we had about 3 times as many supporters. So we basically, I'm really proud of the fact that one thing that libraries in the modern world try to do besides books is provide clean, safe environments for people to meet and have discussions that really nowhere else in the community can you have these discussions. And so they were out in our parking lot. There was police presence just in terms of keeping them separate, and people were able on both sides or every side to kind of speak their piece about the whole thing. So yeah, it was really an interesting, interesting thing. And I hope that we do more of it. We were the first in our county to do it. But you know, in the spirit of inclusivity and defending things that are banned and censored, it's done. And guess what? I think we might do it again sometime. So
there you go.
There you go. Yeah, and I had more questions, and I feel like we're running on time, and I don't see any other questions in chat. Someone did make a comment. Oh, a debate that came up in a reader's advisory class I took was where the best place to put LGBTQ books is in terms of putting them on display in a location that's very visible versus putting them in a less visible location, AKA in the library stacks, where patrons might feel more comfortable browsing and selecting these materials. I'm curious what you all think. So here's your question. Although, let's see, I'm curious what you all think, although I recognize there isn't necessarily a correct answer.
Oh man,
I don't. On Front Street, or do you want your books kind of like where people can browse them privately?
God, my first reaction was like, no, put them up front. But then that's a great point that like maybe not everyone is comfortable with that. So I think maybe both. I think there's a really big push to get LGBT books like not visibly displayed. I mean, ideally, these people want them not in the library at all, but not having them displayed where the youth could see them, I think, is like a fear on the right. So I think probably like a combo of put them right up front where everyone can see them and like has access to them, but then also like maybe some to the side where they can peruse privately. I don't know. That's tough.
Cover? Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, do we want a cover of the pervert, maybe like blown up into poster size and put up front in the library? Like,
I mean, there's nothing sexualized about that cover. It's someone like smoking at the side. There were a few iterations for the cover that didn't really work out. One I wanted was just a ripoff of wait, how much can I cuss exactly?
we're all adults here.
All right, so there's an album by Big Black called Songs About Fucking, and I wanted the original cover for the pervert to be like a riff off of that.
Okay.
And it's just like this very eyesore lime green background and an anime character like mid-orgasm and this sort of look. And I wanted that. We didn't get it, but I mean, in terms of if there were a big blow up the pervert cover, then I'd be a big proponent of that. But for me, where I would actually want it advertised, I mean, a challenge would be what if it wasn't like, because I don't want to make the point that sometimes LGBTQ stuff gets ghettoized necessarily, because a lot of big autobio books right now are LGBT. But I would say that a good proposal would be sort of both. But also, I'm a big fan of the more curated stuff. Someone who worked at Powell's was showing me that they were like working our thing into a big LGBT display. And I think like that's kind of a column A, column B solution where it's like, here's our big curated thing. Here's our notes on the thing. I've seen it in some video game stores. I've seen it in bookstores where it'll be sort of like here's the curator's take on this book, a little explanation on why you will like it. And I think in general, I would like that. I think a good thing about the New York Times bringing comics, I don't know if either of you have heard about this.
Yeah,
bringing comics back to the bestseller lists will be that you could just as easily have like a graphic novel bestseller in a front page or a front glass display opposite, I don't know, however many prose books there are. So, I mean, yeah, ideally both, but like, don't listen to me. I sincerely just want to make as much money as possible doing this. So
yeah, I mean, you did the work. And honestly, I'll weigh in also as a librarian who does presentations for people about how to handle their comics in the library. First of all, people are going to complain about everything. We had a display for March by John Lewis, and that people were mad about that. And I'm like, you're mad about a civil rights display. I have questions that I'm not going to ask.
That's rough. That's like extremely rough.
It's so hard to just be like, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Oh
like,
my God.
Don't say fuck off. No. So if you do have a situation where you have a number of titles, you, as Michelle had mentioned, maybe can put some kind of on Front Street display and with a big sign that's like, want some more, here's where you can go. I think that's a good balance as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different options. I've had people complain about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, really just anything for sitting and existing. That's good. Let's get mad about it. Where's the outrage, y'all? So I have another question that came from our YouTube. What did you discover about yourself while writing your works, any of your works? This is a big one, self-discovery.
I guess like confidence, because a big part of actually getting something published is vocalizing to professionals that your work is worth them personally investing in that, editorializing and then printing, and kind of working at a professional pace, and holding yourself to account. So for me, it was the jump from like the amateur pool to the, all right, now you have to show up and do this. So for me, I think it was like kind of letting go of some kind of bad habits, and letting go of bad, I guess like habits that kind of keep you from going over and completing it.
So you mean habits like a professionalism in your field, or you mean habits like you should be writing today, but you want to kind of procrastinate and put that off?
Well, I mean, beyond that, it's just also like all of the like little bits of like bargaining for all the reasons you like can't have it done. I talked to a guy on a podcast about this recently, where he was saying that like you have to write every day if you're going to be a writer thing, and then when you actually start doing that, you realize that's kind of bullshit, and that what that should actually train you to do is to have a method of operation for when you're going to do your work, and do it within the parameters you set for yourself. And then when you actually have X amount of thing completed, it's done, versus, journaling.
Okay.
So it's like doing your job as doing your job, as opposed to doing this as rote function. And it's really difficult to learn the difference.
When yours was in the island, when the Pervert was in the island versus having to make it a full-size novel, did you end up writing a lot more, or was everything pretty much already, had it been in the island before?
We were only in like three things of island, I believe.
Okay.
Don't quote me, because I think one was like a sort of pinup spread. So
there'll be a lot at the end on this, so make sure you have your facts.
but yeah, writing versus artistry. Writing is the easier of the two jobs. There's been a big controversy online about that. I'm okay with admitting it's the easier of the two jobs. I've never had to break my hand writing. I've never jacked up my hand like QWERTY typing. So I'll say that off the bat, but yeah, you have to learn like disciplines. It's almost sort of like a good thing I had looked at while writing the book was like working out screenplay stuff. If anyone ever wants to write comics, I implore you to look at film screenplays on occasion, because that will get you to a place where you have a visual economy that keeps pace with the words describing what you want to be out there.
So both of you, as have said, read some kind of script or screenplay, or that's interesting. And Grace, what have you learned about yourself while writing?
This feels like like the moment in a bio where they like flash back to, and I, like it lives out.
Draw
like
it out for us too.
Right, exactly. I mean, honestly, that's a great answer. The self-discipline that it takes to like put out a comic, especially like Moonstruck was a monthly for a while. And like when you're doing that kind of book, you have to like really be good on deadlines, because it's 22 pages a month, whether you like it or not. But I think, I don't know. I feel like I've learned a lot about storytelling. Is like, I mean, that's not like about me, but comics is it's a medium where you can't hide when you're Like if the story isn't moving forward, or if you just like are having a day where you just like don't care, I mean, the artist has to live with that for so long. Like it takes you 10 minutes to write like some garbage page that you hate, but the artist is going to have to spend a day on it. So if you do a bad job, you can't, you have to be careful enough and care enough about what you're writing, and like have a plan. And it's easy to just like barf onto the page, but the like editing process and the like the time and the care it takes to do a good job, and like you have to do a good job because of the time. It's a balancing act, but you have to learn to master it when you're doing comics. This is like a very strange and like circly answer, but yeah, I feel like Michelle's answer was really good about ditto about how you have to learn to like discipline yourself and work within these constraints and be creative in the constraints. I don't know, comics it's a really good medium if you're a writer. And honestly, like I kind of fell into it, but I think that I would have sought it out anyway because it's a good combination of a lot of storytelling techniques.
It's a lot of iteration, and it's with any writing, but specifically with that, because it was kind of why Remy, if you look on the front page of our book, it was by Remy Boydell, directed by Michelle Perez, because it's very much like Remy is the film crew, and I'm basically like the person giving context and function through writing and the storytelling, but the person actually building the scene is Remy. So I think it's all about iteration, because like one script is never going to be like done in the first go. I mean, you get down to like a good rhythm, and you'll have less and less edits when you know how the person you're working with, what they can do and what your time constraints are. But it's always about in an ideal situation, it's always a consistent conversation about what you're going to make, and like how it's going to be done for effect.
I had never thought about that, as that relationship that you have to have with whomever is, I mean, if you're a polite person that's going to be like, oh, I'm just going to write some, like you said, some just word vomit or whatever, and just to deal with that. That's interesting. I never ever would have thought about it that way. Did you actually, Grace, feel a lot of anticipation or sort of pressure coming off of something like Lumberjanes, or was it more like it was its own? Yeah, really.
Yeah. You don't want to hit that sophomore slump,
Oh.
I knew that I didn't want it to be. Moonstruck was never going to be like Lumberjanes. I think that they're like just fundamentally very different stories. They're going for two very different things, and I think that helps. But if I had done something that was like, here's a group of girls and they're like doing something else and they're fighting monsters or whatever, I think there would have been more pressure. But I think the fact that it's like a little bit different, it's through a different publisher. I don't know. It's been a very, very different experience from Lumberjanes. But yes. Oh my God. The pressure to succeed after Lumberjanes it was terrible.
I bet. So it's not a question, it's just a comment, but Grace, I have a kiddo right now that just checked out Lumberjanes and he's pretty stoked.
Thank you. Thanks for pushing it on him. I appreciate it.
For both of you, do you have any upcoming projects that you can talk about at all, or that you want to kind of promote real quick before we end this thing?
I have a Lois Lane middle grade graphic novel coming from DC. I don't think I can tell you when exactly, but it'll be like the middle of next year.
Nice.
I think that's the only thing I can talk about, but it's very exciting. You'll like it. It's cute.
Awesome.
I have a sequel to The Pervert coming out called Michigan. And I've been working on I basically in the resource gathering stages, and we're basically going through a lot of draft images and stuff, and we're basically compiling a bunch of stuff for the pitch, but it's going to be a lot more expansive and a completely different genre than the original book, which I'm looking forward to. I've never really made a horror comic, but it's going to be a horror comic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, arguably, that would be the character's perception, is that Michigan is a horror. So,
yeah, we get into that, I guess.
Nice. Okay. So I have a last band and challenge related question. What can each of you say, if you can think of, what would be the most supportive thing that educators, librarians, the traditional gatekeepers could do to make you feel like you're supported, to make you feel like what you're doing matters? What could we collectively, readers, do to help?
I guess evangelize what you believe in, but don't trick yourself into thinking that like simply buying something is support alone. I think support is, I mean, don't get me wrong, tangible support is important, but at the end of the day, it's just also supporting people individually and looking beyond superficial differences and barriers to knowing one another and becoming whole people. I think you have to, it's not enough to just like, just be fandom or whatever. You like, because people mistake fandom for support, and we will be more whole people when we're like, all right, I embrace you as a person. I know we're not 100% on everything, but I think that's, strive for connection, I guess.
I like that. Strive for connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all of that is true. Ditto again. You're just giving great answers. I don't know what to say. I would also say to keep in mind that there is no one LGBTQ experience. So when you're looking for books, if LGBTQ representation is something that you're actively interested in, and supporting LGBTQ creators is something you're interested in, make sure you're looking at a wide variety of creators. In terms of like gender identity and even sexual orientation. There's like, I mean, a gay man is having a very different experience from a lesbian, like racial and just disability. I made a mistake by trying to list them all. Just as many like intersectional points as you can.
Sure.
Just make sure you keep those in mind when you're looking. But I think if you're buying things from creators, that is a way of support. That's true. So I think if you're like thoughtful and you're sticking with your beliefs, even when they're challenged, I think that's a good moral position as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. And I had meant to say with the Drag Queen Storytimes, just that we were so bombarded by support and by detractors, and we were like, oh, this has to end. We can't wait till this comes and goes. And then we realized that to an extent, this is something that LGBTQ people, in the community have to deal with to some extent, knowing that people are going to have a certain kind of bias or see them a certain kind of way or have assumptions. There was a lot of assumptions made about drag queens and what type of lifestyles they live and all this kind of stuff. And,
the principal difference is, like a lot of the people from that experience don't really have the option to like switch it off.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one thing.
Exactly.
And if there's like anything I would say is like, you never really stop coming out. I mean, the older you get, I guess the lower your tolerance for it might become, or maybe it's heightened. I can't say, but it's it would be, it is weird how it can be a microcosm for like greater problems, and I think it really is. People feel like they can't really control how much money they do or don't earn, how much control the government does or does not have in their life. Like, these things feel out of people's control when it could quite possibly be in their control, because look how they organize when like something gay makes them uncomfortable. Imagine if it were applied to problems that like they feel are completely out of control. And I think it's telling about where we're at and the problems we're facing, that people turn more internal than external.
Agreed. All right. Any final thoughts?
Long-winded, no.
Perfect. You've both been wonderful.
You've been wonderful. Thank you for hosting us.
Yes, I've had a whale of a good time, and we're all about that pod life. That was for the roundtable people. So both weird in joke, but they're like, we dare you to do it. Done.
Yeah. Thank you to the roundtable too. Man, they're great.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. We're the newest roundtable, and I'm excited that we're working with intellectual freedom and actually showing some, cohesion within the ALA. So, but thank you both so much for being here for this. And thank you to our audience for listening and joining.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.